In this tutorial, you will learn how to create an enemy idle state that waits briefly before switching to a move state for realistic behavior. Huge thanks to Ақерке, Traul and Hector23 for joining Patreon membership and supporting me on Patreon and grabbing my source code. You can join too for exclusive benefits. Now let's jump straight into building it. I have created three class. So let me explain. First thing, I just created this move state, idle state class, as you can see. And this idle state class just gonna sit on every enemy game object, because the every enemy game object need to play the idle thing, idle animation clip, and every enemy needs to play idle. So that is the reason, and this just gonna sit on. And also I created a specific one which is e1 idle state, and it's gonna inherit from this idle state class, and this just gonna sit on our this first enemy. And if you have second enemy, then you can just create e2 idle state, and if you have third enemy, then you can create a class called e3 idle state, and the list just goes on. And also I created this idle state data class, scriptable object script. Basically right click, create, go over to scripting, then scriptable object script, and name it to something like idle state data or idle data, whatever you want. And also I created a class called entity data, which is a scriptable object script. And this just gonna sit we just created this class because from this class we just want to do everything of our entity class, what we really want to do. And we just created this one because this data needs every enemy, inside every enemy. So that is the thing. So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna shoot out a ray from this enemy game object in the down direction, and if the ray don't collide with this ground, then this enemy need to play the idle animation clip, and this enemy need to stop moving. So we're gonna create the ray, and in order to create the ray, we basically we're gonna do inside our entity class, because because that entity class just gonna sit on every enemy game object, because every enemy game object need to check if the ray is really colliding with this ground or not. So let's create a point for that. So let's select our enemy one, and we're gonna create an empty child game object, and let's call it something like ground check point. So let's call it ground check point, just like that. And I'm gonna choose an gizmo for it, and let's move it somewhere around here, bottom of our player, and make sure you just drag it in front of it. So from this point we just want to shoot out the ray, and we're gonna do it inside our entity class. So let's open up our entity class, which is sitting on every enemy game object. And for that we're gonna make a function, and that function will be a bool type, because we just want to return the value. And we're gonna make this one public, because we're gonna call this function from our where we moving our enemy, we're gonna call it there. And this will be bool because we just want to return it. And we're gonna call this one check ground, check ground, just like that. Make first bracket and some curly brackets. And now what we have to do, inside this function we're gonna use a function called physics2d dot raycast. It just create the ray. So we're gonna create a physics2d dot raycast function, physics2d.raycast, and this function, as a first argument, it will take the point from where we want to shoot out the ray. So we're gonna shoot out the ray from this ground check point that we created. As a first argument it will take, and the second thing, it's gonna take the direction. We're gonna pass vector2 dot down, means simply in the down direction. And the third argument, it's gonna take the length of the ray, so we need to specify it. And the fourth argument, it's gonna take the layer mask, basically which game object we want to target. So since we want to target our ground, so we need to assign our ground as a ground layer. So for now we're gonna make this comment we will make this function comment for now, because we need those variables, so we need to populate them. Let's press down control shift then forward slash or slash to make it comment. And now what we're gonna do, we can do top up our entity class, but creating a separate scriptable object script. It's just keep our project clean. So we will go to Unity editor and just wait. So we're gonna move over to data class, then right click, create, then go over to scripting, scriptable object script, and you can name it to something like entity data. So let's open up our entity data data script, and we can see the path over here, entity data, and we can just specify the path. So what I'm gonna do, instead of calling scriptable object scripts, I can just call it, sorry, I'm gonna replace the path name, the name of the path. So this is our path that we just gonna create our asset, which is our entity data. So we can just define or rename the path. So I'm gonna call it data slash entity data. So the first thing what we need the point, or basically the position, and we can do it inside our entity class. So we don't need to do it inside our entity data script class, which is a scriptable object script. But we do need the layer mask and the length of the array, so let's create them. So gonna make a public float, and we can call it ray length, or let's simply call it distance, and by default I'm gonna set 0.5 if. And the fourth argument, we need the layer mask. So let's make a public a layer mask, and we can call it target layer, and I'm gonna call it something like what is ground, just like that. And let's save our script, and we're gonna head over to Unity editor. We created that scriptable object script class, so we can create the data. So I will head over to my assets folder. Let's right click on it, then create in the top, and in the bottom we can see data, then entity data, and we can have the path we can see inside our class, which is entity data, data slash entity data. So now let's create that. So we're gonna right click, then go to create in the top, data in the bottom, entity data, and I'm gonna call it something like entity data. And we can see we have the distance, by default we have 0.5 chosen. And what is ground, we're gonna choose our ground. And before you choose your ground, make sure you choose the tile ground or ground tile or the ground, and assign with a layer. So go select that. So first thing, I will go to my stuffs folder, sorry, stuff, then tiles, then ground tile, then go over to inspector. In the top right you can see layer, click on it, and then click on add layer, name the layer what you want, then select the game object once again and assign with the layer that you recently created. And now I just define it over here. You can see inside my entity data. And now we need a reference of this entity data, so we can access the distance parameter and what is ground. So let's go over to our entity class, and now we're gonna grab the reference. So let's go to top of our class. Let's make a serialized field private, and we can call it entity data. Let's call it state data, or let's call it simply entity data. And we also need a point from where we want to shoot out the ray. So let's make another serialized field private, and that will be transform for responsible for position, and let's call it ground check point or position, then close that up with semicolon. And now we have them, and we can just remove these forward slashes from this function. Let's remove them. And now this physics2d.raycast, as a first argument, it's gonna take the point. So let's pass our ground check point dot position, and the second thing, the direction. So let's use vector2 dot down. It means that 0 in the x and -1 in the y, so it will be down. And the third argument, it's gonna take the distance. So the first thing, we will go to entity data, and now we're gonna access the distance or the length of the ray. So let's access, which is distance. And the fourth argument, just gonna take the layer mask. So let's go to entity data, and sorry, entity data dot what is ground, and that's all we have to do. And now this function just gonna shoot out the ray at this point in the down direction with this much of distance, and it's gonna target our ground. So it's gonna shoot out the ray. Let's suppose the ray really collide with this ground, then this function just gonna give us a true value, and if the ray don't collide with that our ground tile or ground, then it's gonna give us a false value. So we're gonna store it into a raycast hit 2D because this is a raycast. So we're gonna put it a raycast hit 2D variable, and let's call it something like hit, and let's set equal to this. So this hit can be true or false depending upon if the ray is really colliding with this ground tile or not. And now what we're gonna do, we're gonna return our hit. So let's return our hit because we're doing inside this bool function because we just want to return, and this check ground function just gonna give us true or false value depending upon on this hit, which can be true or false. And now we have that. However, we're not gonna able to witness the ray that we created from that point in the down direction. To see that or to draw that, we need to use another function called onDrawGizmoSelected. So we will navigate to our script once again, and we're gonna use the onDrawGizmoSelected function, and this function over here we do know it's gonna do draw that. But before we draw, we need to check if we assign our ground checkpoint or not. Means we just selected our ground checkpoint and we drag it there or not. So what we will do, before we draw, we will use the if condition, and we want to check that if our ground checkpoint, if it's not equal to null, means it's not empty, and we just assign it that. So we are ready to draw, and to draw that we need to use gizmos.drawRay function, and this function as a first argument it's gonna take the point. So let's pass our ground checkpoint dot position, and the second thing it's gonna take the direction. So let's pass vector2 dot down, and let's multiply this direction with our length of the ray. So we will go to entity data, and let's access the distance or the length of the ray. And if you want to choose a color for this, the ray you just want to draw with a color that you just would like to go with, then you can specify it before you draw. So we're gonna choose a color. So I'm gonna choose gizmos. So we need to type this gizmos gizmos dot color equal to color that we would like to go. So I'm gonna draw with yellow color, so color dot yellow, and that's all we have to do. Color dot yellow. Let's close that up with semicolon, and we're gonna head over to Unity editor, and we're gonna able to witness our ray. The ray just gonna draw from that point that we assign it, and now it's almost done. And just wait, and we can see our underneath enemy one script entity data. So let's take our entity data that we created the asset, let's drag it there, and we're gonna take our ground checkpoint, take that, and we're gonna drag it over to this ground checkpoint field. And as soon as we drag it, we can see the ray and the color is yellow. Now that function just gonna give us a true or false value. It's gonna return the hit, which can be true or false. And we're gonna move over to move state class of this enemy. Why? Because inside that class we just moving our enemy, and we need to check if the ray is colliding with this ground tile or not. So we need to check it there. So we will open up our move state class of our enemy where we moving our enemy. So inside our move state we're doing, so let's go over to that class, and we're moving the enemy. You can see in the bottom over here. So let's make a function for we're gonna make a bool function to check it. So let's go to top of our class, and let's make a protected. So we're gonna make a protected bool, which can be true or false, and we will call is enemy on ground, and let's close that up with semicolon. Is enemy on ground. And now what we're gonna do, we're gonna go over to our do checks function, or you can think of that this is our update or the fixed update function. So we will set is enemy on ground equal to entity dot check ground. Basically we need to call that function which is check ground, and we have the function inside our entity class, and we can see we have inside our constructor basically the reference. So we can simply go over to our entity class, and now we're gonna call the function which is check ground, and make sure you make this first bracket and then close that up with semicolon, because that is a function. That's why we just made that function. So let's suppose this check ground is false, because if we move over to our entity class, let's suppose this return hit this hit is false. So this check ground function just gonna be false, means the ray is not colliding with that ground. So this function becomes false. So this one here is false, means, and we directly setting it is enemy on ground equal to entity dot check ground. So this is enemy on ground will also be false. But if the ray is really colliding with that ground tile, then this will be true, this check ground. So this is enemy on ground will be true because we directly setting it. And now what we're gonna do, let's suppose the ray is not colliding with this ground tile, means the enemy is somewhere around here, because here the ray not gonna collide with this ground tile, as you can see. Means we just need to enter to our idle state. We need to play the idle animation clip, and our enemy need to stop moving. For now we're gonna print out a message. So let's go over to our script, and we're gonna go over to our physics update instead of logic update. And you can think of this physics update which is the fixed update, and we calling this physics update inside that fixed update, means this function just gonna call over again and again, and we need to check over again and again if that ray colliding with that ground or not. So let's use the if condition, first bracket and some curly brackets, and now we're gonna check is so exclamation mark, then is enemy ground, means that if it's false, means the ray is not colliding with that ground. So it's time to enter to idle state of this enemy. For now we just want to print out message, so let's print out something like debug.log, and we will say enemy is not on ground, and enter to idle state of enemy. Just like this I just want to print out, and let's quickly save our script. Let's head over to Unity editor. Just wait few seconds. Let's select the console tab, and we're gonna play our game. As soon as this enemy will be at the end of our ground, then that message just gonna pop up, says something like enemy is not on ground and enter to the idle state of this enemy, as we printing out the message we have done inside our script. So let's check it out quickly. We have done a mistake, we're not calling this sorry, if I move over to my move state class, we're not calling out this physics update function inside that fixed update. So we will go to our enemy one script which is setting on our first enemy, and we can notice we have the update function, but we never included the fixed update. So we need to include it, and we need to call the physics update function. So this line of code will be execute, and this just checking our ground, you can see. So now we just need to call, and we just forgot to do that, and I really apologize for it. So I will navigate to my enemy one script first, and let's include the fixed update function. So we will overwrite firstly, let's overwrite the fixed update. If we do have, let's click on this generate overrides, and we don't have that. So let's include it manually over here. So I'm gonna include the fixed update function, sorry, not fixed join, we need to include the fixed update, and now we need to call the move state physics update function over here. So how we can call that? So the first thing, we need to move over to our state machine class, then we will go to our current state, and now we're gonna call the physics update, and then make this first bracket and then close that up with semicolon. Save your script. Means that we're just going over to our move state class. You can simply say state machine. First thing, we just going over to this state machine class, and then we just accessing the current state. Let's suppose the current state is move state, means we are inside this move state class, and then we just calling the physics update, you can see. And if we navigate to our first enemy script, we can see we calling the physics update over here. Inside this fixed update, which just calls over again and again, but the frame rate is fixed, so that's why it's called fixed update. And now if we save our script, go over to Unity editor, it should be fine by now. And let's play our game. And as soon as this enemy will be at the end of our ground, that message just gonna pop up. Just wait and let's see what's really happening. So first thing, I will select your console tab to see the message, and once it's gonna be here, it should be fine. And indeed we can see the message. If I pause my game, navigate to my console tab, we can see enemy is not on ground, and enter to idle state of enemy, as you can see. So instead of printing out message, we basically need to stop moving our enemy. So we have the idle state class, we do know. So we're gonna get out of play mode, and there we just gonna do that thing. So for now, I hope you get the idea that how you can do it. And now we need to take a look over on idle state class. Just printing out the message inside our console tab says that this message, which is enemy is not on ground, and enter to idle state of enemy. So instead of doing this, we need to move over to our idle state. Means this enemy need to play the idle animation clip. It's need to stop right over here, and then it's need to flip, and then again our enemy need to patrol around the ground to the right side. So to stop that, to enter to our idle state, we're gonna create three separate scripts. First script, we will create a idle state script, which just gonna sit on every enemy game object, because every enemy game object need to play idle. And we will create a specific one idle state for this first enemy, and we can call that E1 idle state. And we will create a third script, which will be a scriptable object script, which will contain the data, like how much time we just want to play the idle animation clip, and we just want to be in idle. And after once the time is over, then again this enemy need to patrol or need to move around this ground. So we're gonna do that. To do that, go over to your project tab, then go to assets folder, scripts folder, and we're gonna create. So just wait. I will navigate to my script folder, then I will head over to my this underscore script folder, and I already created those script, and I'm gonna show you. This is our enemy underscore one script, and sorry, ignore this. If we move over to our scripts folder, then state script, you can see I already created a script called idle state. Basically right click, create in the top, then mono behavior, or you can simply go over to scripting, then click on this empty C# script, and name it to something like idle state. And this script just gonna sit on every enemy game object, and every enemy game object you can think of that this script is need, because every enemy game object need to play the idle animation clip. And for this specific enemy, or this first enemy, we also need to create a script for that, which is one idle state. As you can see, I already created. Basically right click on it, then create, we'll click on this mono behavior script, or you can simply go over to scripting, then empty C# script, and name it to something like E1 idle state or enemy 1 idle state for your first enemy. And also we will create a scriptable object script, which is the idle state data, and this script just gonna contain that how much time we just want to play the ideal animation clip, and then after once the duration is over, then this enemy again it's need to patrol our ground. Basically it's just gonna hold those data. So right now what we're gonna do, we're gonna open up our idle script, so idle state script. So let's quickly open that up, and I already removed that mono behavior and then colon, and if you created an empty C# script, then it's gonna look like this. But we're gonna inherit from that state class that we created. So firstly we need to make this colon, and we're gonna inherit from our state class, which is setting on every enemy game object or every enemy game object inheriting from this state class. Now we need to generate the constructor. So let's generate the constructor. Let's generate our constructor, and also we need to override those functions. So let's override them. We're gonna hold down control plus full stop, or you can simply right click on this the name of the script, then click on this quick action and refactorings, refactorings, and then you can see. So I'm gonna click on this generate overrides in the bottom, and we will uncheck equal cat hash to string, and we will use this function which is interested exit stack, and the list just goes on. And let's click on this OK. So what we really want to do inside this idle state class, because we don't want this enemy to move at all, so we need to set the move speed of this enemy to 0, and we made a function inside our entity class which is sitting on this enemy game object, this first enemy you can assume. So we need to call out the move function, and as a move speed we can simply pass 0f, so this enemy not gonna move at all. So let's go over to our physics update function, and this function we do know we calling inside fixed update, which is moving our player. You can think of it's responsible for that. So the first thing, we will go to entity class, and we already have it inside our constructor, we can see. So let's go to entity class, and let's call out the move function. So dot move, and make first bracket, close that up with semicolon. So as a move speed we're gonna choose 0, because we don't want to move our enemy at all when it's playing the idle state, idle animation, or it's intended to idle. So as a move speed I'm gonna pass 0f. And also we need a time that after how much amount of time we just want to move over to our move state once again. So we're gonna make a function for that. But before we do, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go over to our idle state data class, because this just gonna hold the data like minimum idle time and the maximum idle time of this enemy. So let's go over to this idle state underscore data data script, which is a scriptable object script, and I just want to rename the path. Or what I can simply do, I can copy the copy from my move state data. So I will navigate to my move state underscore data class, and I'm gonna copy this path that we have it over here. We can press down Ctrl C to duplicate. Let's go over to idle state data, and we're gonna remove this, and we're gonna paste this, or you can simply just change the name. Firstly we creating the asset menu, which is move state data, and that is not move state data, this is the ideal one. So let's firstly call it data, and then what we're gonna do, we're gonna rename it over here, and we will call this one to something like data slash, this is the ideal state data. So I'm gonna rename the path as ideal data, just like that. Ideal state data we can call it, or let's call it ideal data instead. Ideal ideal data, just like that. And so we need the maximum and the minimum ideal time. So let's create two parameter for this. So we're gonna make a public float, and we can call it minimum ideal time, and minimum I want something like 2 seconds, and a maximum. So we're gonna press down Ctrl D to duplicate this line, and I'm gonna call this one max ideal time, and the max I want something around 4 unit. And now we have the minimum and the maximum. Let's save our script, and we will go to our idle state class. And now what we're gonna do over here, we're gonna make function to set the idle time maximum and the minimum. So first thing, we will go to our top of our this idle state class, and over here we're gonna declare some variable. So the first thing, we need a bool parameter to just keep when the idle state is over. So we're gonna make a protected we need to make a protected bool. I really apologize, the my system is just lagging a little bit since it's too low. Let's make a protected uh, sorry protected, and this will be bool, and we can call this one to something like is idle time over, is idle time over, is idle time over. Let's close that up with semicolon, and we will go over to our enter state function. So when we enter to that state, we will set this is idle time over to false, because when we enter to idle, we don't want to over our idle state once the time is up. So we will set is idle time over to false inside our enter state function. And now we just set it to false, and we set it to need to set it to true when we need to set this to true when the duration is over of our idle. And we created those data inside our idle state data. So let's go to top of our class, and we need to put it inside our constructor. Basically, we need a reference to this idle state underscore data class reference, which is a scriptable object script. So we need a reference of this, and then we can access this parameter, you can see. So let's go over to our idle state class, and over here we're gonna make a variable for that, and we will call this one to something like idle time. So let's make a protected, and that will be float, and we can call this idle time, and let's close that up with semicolon, and let's make a function to set the idle time when we enter to our idle state. So we're gonna make a function, so let's make it in the bottom, and it's not necessary to make it bottom, you can make it anywhere if you wish. You can make it in the top, you can make it anywhere. So we're gonna make a function. So for function, we're gonna type void, and we will call this function to set idle time, and this function just gonna responsible to set the idle time of our enemy. So we will set our idle time parameter that we created in the top of our class equal to the idle time, the minimum and the maximum we want. And we have done inside this idle state underscore data script, as you can see. So we need a reference. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna put it inside inside our constructor, so we're gonna have the reference. So let's go to top of our class, and we're gonna put it inside our construction. So the first thing, we need to create that parameter, which is the idle state data. So we're gonna make a protected idle state data. Let's call it idle data, just like that. We're gonna call it, let's close that up with semicolon, and now we need to put it inside our constructor. So let's set that. So at the end of our constructor, we're gonna put, which is our idle state data, and not idle state, it will be idle state data, idle state data, and we can call this one idle data. So let's call it idle data, and now we need to set this. So we will set this dot idle data, idle data equal to our idle data, and this dot idle data basically referencing this idle data, and we're setting that idle data equal to this idle data. And later on, we need to replace this script, which is with our real idle state data, and we're gonna do it later. So now let's go over to our set idle time function, and now we need to set the time of our idle time of enemy. To set that, we're gonna use the random.range function. So let's use random.range function, and over here it's gonna take the minimum. So the minimum we want the that we created inside our idle state data script. So basically we will go to idle data, and we're gonna access the minimum idle time, and the maximum we want the max idle time. So let's go to idle data once again, and then dot, we're gonna access the max idle time. So what we simply doing, we just going over to this idle state underscore data class, and we accessing the minimum and the maximum, you can see, which is 2 and the 4. So this will be 2 or 4, and let's assume that this random dot range function to something like 3.5. So this over here gonna be 3.5, and the idle time will be 3.5 because we directly setting it. But we also need to call this set idle time function, so it will set the idle time, and we're gonna call it in when we enter to our idle state. So we will go to enter state function, and we're gonna call the function here, so it will set the idle time. So now we're gonna set our we basically have to call the function which is set idle time. And now we're gonna make first bracket, close that up with semicolon, and that's all we have to do. And now we just set the idle time. We also need a reference, basically we also need to set the is idle time over parameter. This one we created at the top of our class to false, when we need to set it to false once our idle time is over. So now we're gonna move over to this logic update function, which checks every time. So over here we're gonna check the current time. So let's use the if condition, first bracket and some curly brackets, and we will check that time dot time means the current time, if it's greater than or equal to our start time. So we're gonna type our start time state. Basically this parameter we created inside our state script to just keep track of when we enter to that state and the time of that state when we enter it. So basically that the time when we enter it to our idle state. And now top of this we're gonna add the idle time with how much amount of we just want to be inside idle time, idle state. So we're gonna add top of that our idle time, and let's assume that idle time is 3.5. so the current time, if it's greater than or equal to our start time state plus idle time, if that is the case, means that idle time is over. And we basically need to play the move animation of this enemy, and also this enemy need to move because the idle time is over. So right now what we're gonna do, we're gonna set the idle time is idle time over to true, because we just waited few duration, and now it's time to move over to our poop state. So that's why we just created this parameter to just keep track of is idle time is over or not. And when we enter to that state, we just set it to false. But once the duration is over, basically the current time, if it's greater than or equal to start time state, means when we enter to our idle state, the time, and top of that we just added our idle time parameter that we created over here. And we calling the function in the start when we enter to that state. So we just setting is idle time over. And now it's time to move over to our move state, and we will simply press down Ctrl S to save our script. And now we will move over to Unity editor. Let's create the asset of that idle state data. So I will move over to my project tab, assets, and then I will navigate to my data folder. If I don't have, I can make it over here, but to keep our project clean, I'm gonna make a separate folder that for that. So let's go to assets, right click, create in the top folder, and I'm gonna call this folder data underscore enemy, just like that. And now I'm gonna create over here the asset, which is our idle data asset. So let's right click on that folder, then go to create, and in the bottom we can see data and then idle data. So let's click on it, and I'm gonna call this one idle data, just like that. And if we go over to inspector, we can see the minimum idle time is 2 and the maximum is 4. And now if we choose our enemy1 script, we able to see, but we're not able to see because we need to do inside our enemy1 function. we need to initialize the state. Basically we need to create the state inside this enemy1 script, but before we create, we need to open up our e1 or enemy1 idle state, because that just gonna sit on this enemy, or this enemy just gonna take that script. So first thing, we will go to project tab, assets. Basically that is script just gonna be responsible to switch our animation of this enemy to like move state or whatever. So we will go to our scripts folder, underscore script folder, and then I'm gonna move over to this e1 idle underscore idle state script. So let's open that up quickly, and now we're gonna inherit from that idle state script. From this class we're gonna inherit. So let's do that. So the first thing, we will go over to our this e1 idle state script, and now let's inherit from that idle state. So let's make this colon, and we're gonna inherit from idle state class, and now we need to generate the constructor. So we're gonna hold down control plus full stop, generate constructor, and now we're gonna reuse those functions. So let's generate overrides. We're gonna uncheck equals, get has to string, and then okay. And now we have, and we also need a reference to our this enemy1 script, so we can switch the animation, switch the state, because inside this enemy1 script we can see this enemy, which is the move state e1 move state script, as you can see. So we need a reference of this enemy1, and we can do it, we can just put inside our constructor. So let's go over to e1 idle state. To move over to that animation clip, to move over to move state of this enemy, we need a reference to that enemy1 script. So we're gonna put it inside our constructor, so we're gonna have the reference of that. So let's do it. So let's come at the top of our class, and we can make it protected, but it doesn't need to do that, because we just don't want to reuse that enemy1 in any other script we're gonna inherit by now. So since we don't want to reuse that, so we can simply use private, and we're looking for our enemy1 script. Let's type enemy1, and we can call this one enemy1, just like that, and let's put it inside our constructor. So we just made it private instead of protected, because we just don't want to reuse this. So that is the reason. And now we need to just put it inside our constructor. So let's put that. So comma enemy1, and I'm gonna call this enemy1, and we need to set that. So we will set this dot enemy1 equal to our enemy1, and now we have the reference of our enemy1 script, and we are ready to switch animation, switch to that move state. But before we switch to that move state, we basically have to do one thing inside our enemy1 script, which is we need to create the idle state, e1 idle state inside this enemy1, so we can move over to idle state of this enemy as well as move state. So now I'm gonna set my e1 underscore idle state script, and let's go over to enemy1, and now we need to create the state over here, which is the idle one. So this enemy just gonna move over to idle and the move state script. And now let's create the state, and the state is idle by now. So we're gonna make a public this will be e1 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 underscore idle state. We need to create the state inside this enemy1, so we can switch between them idle state, and we can call this one, let's call it idle state instead, idle state. And now we need to just put our, basically let's initialize, basically we need to create the state. We need to put the parameters that we put it inside our constructor. So let's do that. So we will set our idle state inside our start function equal to new e1 idle state, and now this as a first argument, it's gonna take the entity class. So since we inheriting from entity class in the top, we can see, so we can just pass this enemy1 this itself, basically the entity class itself as well, you can think of. So as an entity we're gonna pass this one, and now it's gonna take the animator component. So let's put our animator, and the third argument it's gonna take the bool parameter. So we just want to move over to idle, so we're gonna put idle just like that, and make sure you just go over to Unity editor and you make the transition between them, which is the idle, and create a idle parameter that you just put it over here. And now the third argument it's gonna take the state machine, so let's pass our its state machine. And fourth argument basically this one, and the 1 2 3 4 fifth argument it's gonna take the idle data. So we also need a reference to our idle data, basically this one. If I move over to my data folder inside my project tab, data enemy, you can see idle data. So we also need a reference to that. So let's go over to top of our class, and let's make a serialized field private, and we're looking for idle state data. So let's make idle state underscore data, idle state underscore data, let's call it idle data, just like that. And now we're going to put it over here, which is our idle data. And the sixth argument it's gonna take the enemy one. So this is enemy one script, so we can pass this itself. So we can simply pass this, it's just referencing itself the enemy one script. Now we can simply close that up with semicolon, press down Ctrl S to save your script, and then move over to Unity editor. So now what we have to do, we need to switch between them. So we will go over to our move state class, e1 move state class, and over here we're doing it, you can see. So what we can do, we can just switch the animation, but over here we can not see we have a reference of our enemy one script, because if we have this enemy one script, we can just move over to this idle state, as you can see, which is e1 idle state, basically the idle state of our enemy. So we will go over to e1 move state, and we're gonna grab the reference of that this enemy one script, so we can move over to our idle state. So we will go to e1 underscore move state, which basically this script just taking this first enemy, so that is the reason we're gonna do it there. So we need a reference of our enemy one, just like we have done inside our idle state, which is e1 underscore idle state, as you seen. So we're gonna do the same thing over here. So we're gonna make a private enemy one, and let's call it enemy one, sorry, and then close that up with semicolon. And now we need to put it inside our constructor. Say let's put it there, enemy1, and let's call it enemy1. And now we're gonna set this dot enemy1 equal to enemy1, just like that. And if we save our script, go over to our enemy1 script, we can see we just getting an error where we just put all of the variables inside this e1 move state, because this argument as a last thing it's going to take the enemy1 script. Because if we move over to e1 underscore move state script, we can see we put it inside this constructor, which is enemy1, and you can see over here. So we need to put it there as well. So we will go to enemy1, and now this e1 underscore move state inside constructor, we also need to put our enemy1 script. So as a comma, the last argument it's gonna take the enemy1. So this enemy1 is script itself, so we're gonna pass this, means enemy1 just referencing itself. And now what we're gonna do, we're gonna move over to Unity editor, and we can go over to e1 move state script once again. And if I go over to my move state script, we created a parameter called is enemy on ground, and this becomes false once our enemy at the end of our ground, and we just made it protected. So we can access this variable inside this e1 underscore move state, because we inheriting from that script, as you can see. So now we're gonna move over to this logic update inside this e1 move state, and over here we're gonna check that if, let's make first bracket and some curly bracket, if our enemy so we're gonna put exclamation mark, then is enemy on ground. If it's false and we put this sign which is means false, if that is the case, means that our enemy at the end of our ground. So right now what it's need to do, it's need to stop moving. It's basically need to move over to idle state. To move over to idle state, first thing we will go to state machine script, which is responsible for switching our state. And now we're gonna use this dot change state, and now it's gonna take the state which we just want to enter it. So since we have the reference of this enemy1 script, so by this enemy1 script we can simply move over to that state. So let's do that. So over here we will go to enemy1 script, and now we're gonna access the idle state and then close that up with semicolon. So the first thing, we just going over to this state machine script, and then we calling the change state function, and you can see what it's doing. It's just exiting the current state and entering the new state, and we calling the enter state function. So we just going over to this enemy1 script, and then we just accessing this idle state. You can see inside this e1 underscore move state script. First thing, we just going to state machine script, then change the state, and we just put the state over here. Now we can simply save our script, and if we move over to Unity editor, as soon as our enemy will be at the end of our ground, you will see the enemy will stop moving. Now the compilation is done, and if we go ahead, and we need to take our idle data, and we're gonna drag it over to this idle data slot underneath our enemy1 script. And if we go ahead, play our game, I really apologize, it's lagging way, and you will see it should be stopped right over here. Just wait. And indeed we can notice that enemy just stops, but the problem is that this enemy is still playing the move animation clip over again and again. If I pause my game, move over to my console tab, as you can see idle does not exist. Basically we need to make the transition to our idle animation clip of this animation. So let's get out of play mode, and we need to set the idle parameter which we didn't set yet, so we need to set that. So let's select our enemy1, go over to animator tab, and now we're gonna make the transition to our idle. So we're gonna right click on this boss or bug enemy. Let's make back transition to our idle, and we're gonna choose the transition. We're gonna choose two condition. So we're gonna create a idle parameter. So let's click on this over here parameters, then bool, and we're gonna call it idle, and make sure you spell it correct as you put it inside your enemy1 script right over here. And I can see the I is capital, so make sure the spelling is correct. And now let's choose the back transition, go over to inspector, we're gonna uncheck the has exit time, fixed duration. Let's set the transition duration to 0, and let's choose two condition. So the first condition, I just want to set the move state to false, move parameter to false. So let's click on this plus icon two more time. So we will set move to false and idle to true, because we want to play the idle animation clip. So I will set idle to true. But once we make the transition from this idle to our work, so we're gonna choose one more condition. So let's click on this plus icon, and now we're gonna choose if idle is true. If idle is true, we need to set the idle to false, because we just moving over to move. But once we making the back transition, then we setting the move to false and idle to true. So this enemy just gonna play the idle animation clip. And let's take a quick look on this, and by now it's gonna be fine. And also we need to move over to our move state, and this enemy needs to flip, and we will talk about that in the next upcoming tutorial. For now, just see that what it's gonna do that, and you will see. Just wait, just wait. And once the enemy just gonna be here, and we can notice now this enemy is playing the idle animation clip over again and again. And also we need to enter to our move state. So let's do that. So we're gonna get out of play mode, and if we move over to our idle state script class over here, as you can see, we're just setting is idle time to over. So now what we're gonna do is idle time to is over. Then that means we need to move over to our move state of that enemy. So we will go to e1 idle state, and since we made that parameter which is idle time over as a protected, so we can reuse that parameter inside this e1 idle state, because we inheriting from that idle state script class, as you can see. And now we're gonna move over to logic update, and over here we will check. So let's use the if condition first brackets, and we will check that if is idle time is over, means idle is over, it means that we need to enter to our move state once again. So to move over to our move state, first thing we will go to state machine script, then change the state, and we have the reference of our enemy one, so we can switch the animation. So firstly we will go to enemy one script, and now we will move over to move state. So let's access the move state, and that's all we have to do. And now we're gonna save our script. So if I select my enemy one, and let's make the ray length a little bit small, which is containing inside our entity data. So I'm going to double click on this entity data, and the distance I'm going to choose something around 0.25, just like that. And if we choose, we can see it's way small, and I'm going to take my crown checkpoint and let's move it somewhere around here. I guess I need to make I need to drag it close to my enemy one, so it's gonna be fine. And I guess this is fine. And once we done, we can just go over to overrides and then apply all. If you turn it your enemy into a prefab. And now if we go ahead play our game, you will see this enemy just gonna move over to move state once the idle time is over, because once our idle time is over, then we just moving over to our move state, and then this enemy just gonna play the move animation clip, you will see. Just wait. Now we done some mistake, so now it's basically doing that thing, it's working fine. Basically just wait, you will see. And this enemy just move it to idle, and now once again it's moving to move state, but it's not doing at all because it's the end of the ground, and the basically this length just taking the ground. So what we basically need to do, we need to flip this enemy to the right side. To do that, let's get out of play mode, and if we select our enemy one, go over to transform, then rotation in the Y, if we set it to -180, we can notice that this enemy flips to the right direction. So I'm gonna set back to 0, and we're gonna do it inside our entity class, because every enemy need to flip to the left or right. So that's why we're gonna do it entity class, which is setting on every enemy game object. So let's go over to our entity class, and this enemy one inheriting from this entity class, as you can see. So now let's go over to entity class, and let's make a function for flip, and I'm gonna make it over here, and we will make this function public since we just want to call this function from another class. So we're gonna make a public void, let's call it something like flip, just like that. And let's make first bracket and some curly brackets. And now what we're gonna do, we're gonna flip our enemy. To flip that, let's create a parameter for first to just keep track of which direction this enemy is looking. So let's come at the top of our class, and let's make a private parameter for that. So I'm gonna make a private bool, and then we can call this one to something like facing left. So let's call it facing left equal, let's close that up with semicolon. So we created this parameter which is facing left, and we will move over to this start function, because this start function get called at the beginning of our game. At the beginning of our game, I'm gonna set facing left equal to true, Why I just set it to true? Because as you can see, we just gonna look to the left direction in the start of the game, this enemy. So that is the reason I just set it to true. And now we just gonna move over to our flip function, and over here what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna check that if let's make first bracket and some curly brackets. If facing left parameter is true, means we're just looking to the left direction. So right now what we're gonna do, we're gonna flip our enemy. To flip that, we will go to transform, then Euler angles of our enemy, which has the x, y and the z. So we're gonna set equal to a new vector 3, a new vector 3, and it's just gonna have x comma y comma z. So in the y, we do know if we set it to minus 180 or 180. So if I set minus 180, then this enemy just gonna look to the right direction. Basically we just going over to this enemy transform, then rotation or Euler angles of this enemy, and we're setting this y to minus 180 or 180. So this enemy will flip to the right. And after flipping our enemy, so but in the x we're gonna do 0f, in the z we're gonna do 0f. And after flipping our enemy to the right side, we're gonna set this facing left parameter to false, because we know will be no longer able to look to the left direction. So after flipping, we will set facing left to false. And now what we need to do else, if our enemy is looking to the right direction. So in this situation, we're gonna copy this line of code and let's paste it over here. Sorry, I just done a mistake. I really apologize, I just done a mistake. So I'm gonna paste it over here by Control V. And now we just want to set minus 180 to 0. So enemy just gonna look once again to the left direction, and now facing left we're gonna set it to true once again. So if our enemy is looking to the right direction, then what we're doing, we're just setting back y to 0. So our enemy will flip once again to the left, and then facing left we set it to once again to true, because we're just gonna look towards to the left direction. And now we're gonna save our script. Let's go over to Unity editor, and we're gonna open up our idle state e1 idle state script, because there we just doing that thing. We're doing that thing, and once the idle time is over, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna call the flip function. And we do know what flip function is really doing. It's gonna flip this enemy to the right direction, and we're gonna call it once the idle time is over of this enemy. So we will open up our e1 idle state script, and over here we can see if idle time is over, then we just going over to move state. So after going to move state, we just want to flip our enemy. To flip that, we will go to entity class, which we already have it inside our constructor, we can see. So we will go to entity class, entity, and now call the flip function, flip, and then first packet, and we're gonna close that up with semicolon. And now let's go over to Unity editor. So I'm gonna move over to my animator tab, and let's select this work underscore boss or enemy. Let's right click on it and set as layer default state. And now let's click on this play button in the top, and you will see this enemy. By now it's gonna flip to the right direction as soon as the idle time is over, and this enemy just gonna be at the end of our ground tile. And we're gonna take a quick look on this. So now let's see, it's still playing. I don't know, it's flips to the right, so we have done mistake. So I'm gonna leave it idle boss at set as layer default, and let's check it out. I don't know, this enemy just flips. Basically we have done some mistakes, but I'm gonna get out of play mode, and I'm gonna take this enemy and I'm gonna put it somewhere then I can check for. So I'm gonna put it somewhere around here. So let's take our enemy. I'm gonna take my this enemy. Let's select the move tool in the scene view, and let's move it somewhere around here. And it's taking with the ground, and I guess this just gonna work fine. So let's take a quick look on this. Let's click on this play button, and by now this enemy should be patrol around this ground. but once it's gonna be at the end of our ground tile, then it will enter to idle state, and when the idle state is over, then once again this enemy is just gonna move, and we will see that. Just wait a minute. And we can see it's playing idle, and then sorry, move, and then once our idle state is over, we can notice this enemy is now playing the move, and it's just flipping as soon as the idle time is over to the left or right direction. We can see, and once our enemy is at the end of our ground, we can notice it's playing the idle animation clip, and once our idle is over, then it's playing the move animation clip of this enemy, and this enemy is just moving. So I hope you get the idea that how you can do it. As you can see, so by now this enemy just doing fine, and we didn't make any wrong thing. So you can just set this work underscore boss or work animation of this enemy as a default by right clicking on it and set as layer default state. Because we if we go to our enemy one script, we just initialize the move state first, so that is the reason. And if you initialize the idle state, then you can just put it over here. So I hope you get the idea that how you can do it, and I will see you in the next upcoming tutorial.